The Galactic Council emergency meeting was called after reports of massive destruction began flooding in from across Vorthan space. The Great Hall that normally echoed with peaceful diplomatic discussions now buzzed with fear and confusion as representatives from dozens of alien species tried to understand what was happening. Ambassador Chen Weiming from the Altarian Republic stood at the speaker's podium with all four of his arms trembling as he read the intelligence reports. His species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 200 years, and they had never seen anything like what humans were doing to the Vorthan Empire. The reports were almost impossible to believe. In just 3 months, human forces had eliminated 47% of the Vorthan military fleet. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was being systematically destroyed by a species that had joined the galactic community only 3 years ago. What frightened the council members most was not just the scale of human military success, but the way they were achieving it. The Vorthan had expected humans to launch a direct assault on their homeworld, like every other species had tried to do, but humans were fighting a completely different kind of war. Instead of attacking the obvious targets, humans struck everywhere except where they were expected. They destroyed industrial centers that produced weapons and supplies. They eliminated transportation hubs that moved resources between star systems. They systematically dismantled the Vorthon's ability to maintain their empire. Colonel Quan Minyoung was 41 years old and had been an engineer before the war started. She commanded a special unit that studied captured alien technology and found ways to improve human weapons and defenses. Her team could reverse engineer any alien device within weeks. The engineering corps had captured dozens of Vorthon ships and weapon systems during the first months of the war. Instead of just studying them, they improved them and created hybrid designs that combined the best features of human and alien technologies. Soon human ships were mounting Vorthan plasma cannons alongside their own quantum torpedoes. The combination created weapons that were more powerful than anything else in the galaxy. Human shields were upgraded with alien defensive technology, making their ships nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. The psychological impact of human warfare was devastating. To Vorthan society, their news networks tried to broadcast propaganda about military victories, but everyone could see that their empire was falling apart. The government tried to maintain control, but fear was spreading faster than their lies. Major Shin Haijin commanded reconnaissance units that mapped every star system in Vorthan space. Her teams identified weaknesses in their infrastructure that traditional military thinking would have ignored. They discovered that the empire's strength that came from rigid hierarchical command structures. The Vorthan system of government depended on a few key leaders making all the important decisions. When those leaders were eliminated, the entire system would collapse. Human special forces began systematic assassination campaigns targeting Vorthan commanders and government officials. The aliens were being eliminated faster than they could be replaced. Every time the Vorthan promoted a new admiral or general, that person would disappear within days. Human intelligence networks seemed to know about every appointment before it was even announced. The turning point came at the Battle of Vorthan Prime's moon. The planet was the heart of the Vorthan Empire, and its moon served as the primary military base for their home fleet. The Vorthan had assembled over 300 warships to defend their most important world fleet. Admiral Song Ji-hoon was 53 years old and commanded the largest human battle fleet ever assembled. His armada included ships from every human colony and military base in the galaxy. Over 200 vessels had been gathered for this decisive engagement, but Admiral Song did not immediately attack the Vorthan fleet. Instead, he positioned his ships in the outer system and waited. His forces spent 6 days monitoring alien communications and mapping their defensive positions while the Vorthan wondered what the humans were planning. The Vorthan commanders became increasingly nervous as they watched the human fleet maintain its position. They sent patrol ships to investigate, but the humans avoided contact and continued their mysterious observations. The waiting was almost worse than battle. During those 6 days, human intelligence teams infiltrated the moon base and the orbital defense platforms. They planted explosives and computer viruses that would activate when the battle began. They also identified the exact locations of every important Vorthon commander. When the humans finally attacked, it was not a battle, it was a perfectly coordinated execution. The assault began simultaneously from 17 different directions, with human ships appearing from hyperspace at precisely calculated locations. The human fleet moved with mechanical precision that seemed impossible for organic beings. Every ship knew exactly where to go and what to do. The attack was so well coordinated that it looked like a single giant organism rather than hundreds of individual vessels. The Vorthan defense fleet outnumbered the human attackers by more than 3 to 1. They had more ships and more weapons, and they were defending their own territory. But none of that mattered when the humans revealed their true capabilities. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it was over, the Vorthan home fleet had been completely destroyed. Not a single human ship was lost, and most of the alien vessels were captured intact rather than destroyed. The demonstration of human military superiority was absolute. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the recordings of the battle were broadcast on every news network. Alien species that had feared the Vorthan Empire for centuries suddenly realized that humans were far more dangerous than the aliens they had just defeated. The Altarian Republic immediately sent a message to Earth offering to become a human protectorate. The Zephyrian collective offered to share their most advanced technology in exchange for a defense treaty. Even species that had never had contact with humans began sending diplomatic missions, but the most shocking reaction came from the Vorthan people themselves. As news of their military defeat spread throughout the Empire, civilian populations began surrendering to human forces. Without resistance, many Vorthan colonies actually welcomed human occupation as liberation from their own oppressive government. The Vorthan Empire had ruled through fear and brutality for 3 centuries. Their own people had been kept in line through constant surveillance and harsh punishment. Many Vorthan civilians had dreamed of freedom, but had never dared to rebel against their powerful military. Now that the military was gone, the true nature of Vorthan society was revealed. It was a civilization built on oppression and maintained through violence. The Empire had been a prison for its own people as much as a threat to other species. Human occupation forces were shocked to discover that many Vorthan planets actually celebrated their arrival. The aliens had been told that humans were savage monsters who would destroy their civilization, but instead they found disciplined soldiers who brought food and medical supplies. The contrast between human and Vorthan behavior was stark. The Vorthan had conquered through destruction and enslavement, but humans seemed more interested in building than destroying. They established hospitals and schools and helped repair the damage caused by centuries of Vorthan oppression. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans represented something completely new in galactic politics. They were not conquerors seeking to build an empire. They were protectors who fought to defend their families and their way of life. The Vorthan Empire was finished as a military threat, but the war was not over yet. There were still Vorthan leaders who refused to surrender, and there were other alien species watching to see how this conflict would end. The hunt would continue until every person responsible for the new Soul Colony massacre had been brought to justice. The galaxy had learned that humans were not peaceful explorers pretending to be civilized. They were apex predators who had learned to control their violent nature until it was needed. The pack was hunting together now with perfect coordination and unstoppable determination. The Vorthan Empire would fall, and the galaxy would remember forever what happened when someone made the mistake of attacking human families. 6 months after the massacre at New Soul Colony, Emperor Vorthok sat in his massive throne room, watching through the huge windows as human warships filled the skies above his homeworld. The ships were so numerous that they blocked out the light from the system's 3 suns and cast the Imperial Palace into permanent shadow. The mighty Vorthan Empire that had conquered 17 different alien species over 3 centuries was now facing complete destruction. The Emperor, who had ruled with absolute power for 50 years, found himself powerless against the human forces that surrounded his planet. Admiral Ru Songmin was 46 years old and had been chosen personally by President Park Min-ho to deliver the final ultimatum to the Vorthan leadership. His voice echoed through every communication system on the planet as he spoke with the cold authority of someone who held the power of life and death. The Admiral listed the charges against Emperor Vorthok and his government: genocide against human civilians, unprovoked warfare against peaceful colonies, mass murder of innocents. The crimes were read out slowly and clearly so that every person on the planet could understand exactly why their empire was about to be destroyed. Emperor's council chamber erupted in panicked discussion as his advisors tried to find some way to escape the situation they had created. General Thekman had been the architect of countless military victories during his 30-year career. He had planned the attacks that had conquered entire star systems, but now the general found his voice breaking as he reported their military situation to the Emperor. There were no ships left to fight, with no weapons capable of penetrating human defenses, no allies willing to come to their aid. Everything they had built over 300 years had been systematically destroyed. The Emperor looked out at the human fleet and tried to understand how this had happened. 6 months ago, the Vorthan Empire had been the most powerful military force in the galaxy. They had controlled hundreds of star systems and commanded millions of soldiers. Now they had nothing. The human attack had been so thorough and so devastating that the Vorthan military had simply ceased to exist. Their fleets were destroyed, their bases were captured, and their commanders were dead or in prison. What broke the Vorthan spirit was not just the military defeat, but the realization of what humanity represented. Other alien species fought wars for territory or resources or political advantage, but humans fought for something much more dangerous. They fought for their families. The difference between fighting for conquest and fighting for survival made humans unstoppable. When the Vorthan attacked other species, those species had something to lose. They could surrender and hope to negotiate favorable terms, or retreat and rebuild their strength elsewhere, but humans had no interest in negotiation or retreat. When their families were threatened, they became something that the galaxy had never seen before. They became predators who would hunt their enemies across space and time until every threat was eliminated. President Park Min-ho broadcast his message to the Vorthan people from his office on Earth. His words were translated into every Vorthan language and broadcast on every communication channel on their homeworld. The message was simple and final. The president explained that Vorthan leaders had chosen to murder 12,000 innocent humans, including women and children who had never threatened anyone. The attack had been unprovoked and brutal and designed to terrorize humanity into abandoning their colonies. But the aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had believed that humans would accept this atrocity in silence. They had thought that humans were weak and would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They had been completely wrong about human nature. The terms of surrender were absolute and non-negotiable. The Vorthan Empire would be completely dismantled and its military permanently disbanded. The government would be dissolved and new leadership would be chosen under human supervision. Vorthan military leaders who had participated in the attack on New Sol Colony would be tried for war crimes. The trials would be public and broadcast throughout the galaxy so that other species could see what happened to those who murdered human families. Would be paid to human colonies for the next 100 years. The Vorthan people would work to rebuild what their empire had destroyed, and to compensate the families of those who had been killed. Their children and grandchildren would grow up knowing the cost of attacking innocent people. Most importantly, the galaxy would remember forever what had happened when the Vorthan Empire made the mistake of awakening humanity's protective instincts. The story would be told on every world and in every language so that no other species would make the same error. In the ruins of New Sol Colony, Captain Hong Subin led a memorial service for the 12,000 people who had died in the attack. She was 29 years old and had lost her own brother in the bombardment. She had volunteered for the most dangerous missions during the war, seeking revenge for his death. The memorial site was built where the colony center had once stood. A simple monument listed the names of every person who had died, men, women, and children whose only crime had been wanting to build a better life among the stars. Captain Hong placed flowers on the monument as she spoke words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. She said that the aliens had tried to break humanity's spirit by murdering their families, but instead of breaking them, the attack had revealed what humans truly were. She explained that humans were not the peaceful explorers they had pretended to be when they joined the Galactic Council. They were Earth's children, descendants of the most successful predators their planet had ever produced. When their families were threatened, they became something that nothing in the galaxy could stop. The captain said that humans did not distinguish between military threats and personal threats. Anyone who harmed their families would be hunted across the galaxy until nothing remained. This was not a boast or a threat, it was simply a statement of fact about human nature. The Galactic Council met in emergency session to revise their threat assessment protocols. The attack on New Sol Colony and humanity's response had changed everything they thought they knew about warfare and diplomacy in their galaxy. A new classification was added to their database that would be used to evaluate any future conflicts involving human interests. The classification was simple and clear. Never attack human civilians. Humanity does not distinguish between military and personal threats. Warning: continued harm their families and they will hunt you across the galaxy until nothing remains. This is not negotiable and this is not subject to diplomatic resolution. This is simply how humans respond to threats against their children. Database entry concluded with a final note that would be studied by alien military leaders for generations. The greatest mistake any species can make is to assume that humans are motivated by the same things that motivate other civilizations. Do not fight for territory or resources or political advantage. They fight for their families and their future. When those things are threatened, they will become monsters to protect them. This transformation is not temporary, it is permanent. The war had taught the galaxy a lesson that would never be forgotten. Humanity had revealed their true nature and shown that beneath their civilized appearance, they remained the apex predators that had dominated their homeworld. The galaxy would never be the same again. Every alien species now knew that there were consequences for attacking human families. The beasts had been awakened, and they had shown that they would protect their own no matter what the cost. Peace returned to human space, but it was a different kind of peace than before. It was the peace that came from strength and from the knowledge that any species that threatened human families would face the same fate as the Vorthan Empire. The stars belonged to humanity now, not through conquest but through the demonstration that they were willing to fight harder and longer than anyone else to protect what they loved. The galaxy had learned to respect and fear the sleeping giants who called themselves human. 2 months after the terrible attack on New Sol Colony, the Vorthan Empire received their first real taste of human warfare. It came in a way they never expected, and it taught them that humans were not like any other species they had ever fought. Before, the lesson was written in fire and blood across the darkness of space. The merchant ship Prosperity looked like it was in serious trouble as it limped through the Kepler star system. The ship was sending out distress signals on all communication channels, asking for help and claiming that their engines were failing. The ship looked damaged with scorch marks on its hull and pieces of metal floating away from its sides. 3 Vorthan patrol ships detected the distress signals and moved to investigate. The Vorthan were not naturally helpful to other species, but they wanted to know what had happened to this human ship and whether it posed any threat to their operations in the system. The patrol ships surrounded the Prosperity and demanded that the humans surrender. Commander Park Yuna was 32 years old and had been planning this mission for 6 weeks. She had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the human fleet, and she was ready to show the aliens what humans could do when they were angry. Her ship looked damaged, but it was actually one of the most advanced warships humans had ever built. The fake damage on the hull was carefully designed to hide the real weapon systems underneath. The scorch marks covered up the openings where quantum torpedoes could be fired. The floating debris was actually tiny sensor drones that were mapping the positions and weaknesses of the Vorthan ships. When The Vorthon ships came close enough. Commander Park activated the hidden weapons. The Prosperity transformed from a helpless merchant ship into a deadly predator in less than 3 seconds. Quantum torpedoes erupted from concealed launchers and energy beams sliced through the alien vessels like knives through paper. The Vorthon patrol ships had no time to react or call for help. The engagement lasted exactly 12 minutes, and when it was over, nothing remained of the 3 alien vessels except glowing debris floating in space. Commander Park smiled as she recorded her mission report for headquarters. This was not an isolated incident. The same pattern repeated itself across 15 different star systems. Human ships pretending to be refugees or traders or explorers would approach Vorthon positions and then reveal their true nature as military vessels. The aliens began to fear any contact with human ships. Lieutenant Colonel Oh Sang-woo commanded a special unit called the Rangers. These soldiers were trained to fight in zero gravity and to operate in the vacuum of space without being detected. They could move through enemy ships like ghosts and disabled entire crews without making a sound. The Rangers specialized in boarding actions where they would secretly enter enemy vessels and take control of them from the inside. They used advanced technology that allowed them to cut through ship hulls without triggering alarm systems. Once inside, they could disable the crew and capture the ship intact. Captain Yu Yu was one of the youngest fleet commanders in human history at only 28 years old, but she had already proven herself to be a tactical genius. Her battle group had won 7 engagements against Vorthon forces without losing a single ship. She had studied alien military doctrine and found ways to exploit their weaknesses. The Vorthon military had developed their tactics over hundreds of years of conquest. They were used to fighting other alien species that followed predictable patterns. Most species would gather their fleets in open space and trade massive volleys of weapons fire until one side was destroyed or retreated. But humans fought completely differently. They used deception and misdirection to confuse their enemies. They would attack from unexpected directions and use tactics that the Vorthon had never seen before. Human commanders seemed to think several moves ahead, like they were playing a complex game. That psychological warfare was just as important as the physical battles. Human intelligence operations had been studying Vorthon society for months before the war began. They understood how the alien government worked and how their military command structure operated. General Lee Dong-hyuk was responsible for all human intelligence operations against alien civilizations. He was 51 years old and had spent his entire career learning about other species and how to fight them. He had agents working inside alien governments and military organizations. These human agents had been placed in position years before the war started. They learned alien languages and customs and integrated themselves into alien society. When the conflict began, these sleeper agents activated simultaneously and began causing chaos within the Vorthon Empire. The alien news media started reporting strange and frightening stories. Vorthon colonies would suddenly go silent with no explanation. Their populations would vanish overnight, leaving no trace of what had happened. To them, military patrols would disappear completely as if they had never existed. The Vorthon people began to whisper about shadow fleets that could appear and disappear without warning. They told stories of human soldiers who fought with inhuman precision and showed no mercy to enemies who had threatened their families. The fear spread through Vorthon society like a disease. Supply convoys that had traveled the same routes safely for years suddenly started disappearing. Communication stations that had operated for decades went offline without sending distress signals. Mining operations that had been profitable for centuries were abandoned by their terrified workers. The Vorthon military tried to adapt to human tactics, but they found it almost impossible. Their commanders had been trained to fight conventional battles with large fleets meeting in open space. They did not know how to counter an enemy that refused to fight by the established rules. Admiral Kekstar, who had ordered the destruction of New Sol Colony, he found himself trapped in his own command center as human commandos appeared from the shadows around him. His security forces had been disabled without triggering a single alarm. The humans had infiltrated his flagship without being detected. Captain Baek In-ho was 35 years old and had been chosen personally by President Park Min-ho to deliver humanity's response to the alien who had murdered 12,000 innocent people. She looked at Admiral Kekstar with cold eyes that showed no emotion as she spoke. The alien admiral tried to speak about military honor and the rules of war, but Captain Baek cut him off with a gesture. She told him that those rules had been thrown away the moment he decided to murder human families. She explained that he was about to learn what humans became when their children were threatened. The execution was broadcast to every Vorthon military installation in the galaxy. The message was clear and simple. Humans were no longer pretending to be peaceful explorers. They were apex predators who had been awakened by the attack on their colony, and they would hunt down everyone responsible. The Vorthon Empire had controlled 17 different alien species over 3 centuries of conquest. They had built their power through fear. An overwhelming force. They had never encountered a species that could match their violence and exceed their ruthlessness. But humans were different from every other species. The Vorthon had conquered when threatened. Humans did not surrender or flee. Instead, they became more dangerous and more determined to destroy their enemies completely. The galaxy was beginning to understand what humanity really was underneath their civilized appearance. The hunt had begun, and the Vorthon Empire was about to learn that they had awakened something that would not stop. Until every trace of their civilization had been erased from the galaxy, the beasts were fully awake now, and they were hungry for revenge. The morning sun was bright and warm on New Sol Colony as Jinwoo walked through the main street toward the mining center. His boots made soft sounds on the metal walkways that connected all the buildings in their small but growing town. 12,000 humans lived here now, and every day brought new families from Earth, looking for a better life among the stars. Jinwoo was 35 years old and had been living on this planet for almost 4 years now. He remembered when there were only a few hundred people here living in temporary shelters and eating food from supply ships that came from Earth every few months. Now they had real buildings, made of strong materials, and their own farms that grew fresh vegetables and fruits. In huge glass houses, the air smelled clean and fresh here, much better than the crowded cities. Back on Earth, where Jinwoo had grown up, the sky was a different color than Earth's sky, more purple than blue, but it was beautiful in its own way too. Small moons hung in the morning sky like silver coins, and Jinwoo never got tired of looking at them. Lena was already at work in the communication center when Jinwoo walked past her building. She waved at him through the big window, and he waved back. Lena was 28 years old and came from the same city on Earth as Jinwoo. They had become good friends since arriving at the colony, and Jinwoo sometimes thought maybe they could become more than friends someday. The mining operation was going very well these days. The planet had rare metals that Earth needed for building new spaceships and space stations. The work was hard, but the pay was good, and most importantly, the miners felt like they were helping humanity grow stronger. In the galaxy, every day they dug up tons of precious materials that would help build more colonies on other planets. Shinseek was the captain of the research ship that stayed in orbit above their planet. His job was to watch for any problems and to study the planet to learn more about it. He was 42 years old and had been a space captain for 15 years. He had seen many strange and wonderful things in space, but he loved this peaceful assignment, watching over the growing colony. The children in New Sol Colony went to school every morning just like children on Earth, but their school was different because they learned about living on other planets and about the different kinds of aliens that lived in the galaxy. Some of the older children wanted to become space pilots when they grew up, and others wanted to be scientists who would discover new planets. Minsu was one of these children. He was 12 years old, and his dream was to captain his own spaceship someday. His parents had brought him to New Sol Colony when he was 8 years old, and he could barely remember living on Earth anymore. This planet felt like home to him, and he loved running through the gardens and playing with his friends in the open spaces. Between the buildings, the colony had many different kinds of people from all over Earth. There were farmers who grew food in the big greenhouses, and engineers who kept the power plants running, and doctors who took care of everyone when they got sick. There were teachers and cooks and mechanics, and even artists who painted pictures of their new world. Every week there was a big meeting where all the adults could come and talk about how to make their colony better. They talked about building new houses and schools and parks. They made plans for the future and dreamed about the day when their small town would become a big city with hundreds of thousands of people. The Galactic Council was a group of different alien species that worked together to keep peace in the galaxy. Earth had joined the council 3 years ago, and everyone thought this meant that humans would be safe as they built new colonies on other planets. The alien species seemed friendly enough, and they had welcomed humans into their group, but not everyone in the galaxy was happy about humans expanding to new planets. The Vorthan Empire was a group of aliens who believed that they should control all the best planets, and they did not like seeing humans growing stronger and building more colonies. They had been watching human expansion for months and making plans. Admiral Kekstar was the leader of a big Vorthan fleet. His ships were powerful and his soldiers were trained for war. He had conquered many other alien species over the years, and he thought humans would be just as easy to defeat. He looked at reports about human colonies and saw them as weak targets that would surrender quickly. The Vorthan Empire had been ruling parts of the galaxy for hundreds of years. They were used to other species being afraid of them and doing whatever they demanded. When they attacked other planets, those species usually gave up without much fighting or ran away to hide on other worlds. But the Vorthan had never defied humans before. On the morning that would change everything, Jinwoo was checking the big machines that cleaned their air and made sure they had enough oxygen to breathe. These machines were very important because the planet's natural air was not good for humans to breathe. He had been doing this job for 2 years, and he was good at it. Lena was listening to radio signals from space like she did every day. Most of the time she heard messages from other human colonies or from Earth or from trading ships that carried goods between the planets. Sometimes she heard signals from alien ships, but they were usually just normal messages about trade or travel. But today was different. Today she started hearing strange signals that she had never heard before. They were coming from far away but getting stronger, which meant that whatever was sending them was getting closer. She tried to figure out what the signals meant, but they were in a language she did not know. Captain Hai noticed something wrong on his ship's sensors. He saw 12 big objects moving toward their planet very fast. The objects were much bigger than normal trading ships, and they were not following the usual flight paths that peaceful ships used. He sent a message to the colony warning them that something dangerous might be coming. The alien fleet came out of hyperspace like a storm. The ships were huge and black and covered with weapons. They surrounded the planet so that no one could escape. Admiral Kekstar looked at the peaceful human colony below and felt pleased with how easy this would be when the alien voice came through every radio and communication device in the colony. The people stopped what they were doing and listened in. Fear Admiral Kekstar spoke in perfect human language, telling them that they had taken something that belonged to the Vorthan Empire and that their expansion had to stop. Jinmu grabbed Lenar's hand as the first energy beam started falling from the sky. The weapons were incredibly powerful and they turned buildings into dust in seconds. The colony's shields tried to protect them, but they were not strong enough to stop such a massive attack. The bombardment continued for hours. The beautiful gardens burned, the schools collapsed, and the dreams of 12,000 humans turned to ash and smoke. Jinmu thought about his daughter Soyoung, who was safe on Earth studying at the academy. At least she would live to remember them all. When it was over, New Seoul colony was completely destroyed. Nothing remained of the town that had been built with so much hope and hard work. The Vorthan fleet left as quickly as they had come, leaving behind only death and silence. They thought they had taught humanity a lesson about knowing their place in the galaxy, but they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had attacked human families and killed human children. They thought humans would be scared and would stop building colonies. But they did not understand what they had just done. They had awakened something in humanity that had been sleeping for a long time. The news would reach Earth in 2 days, and then the galaxy would learn what happened when you hurt human families. The Vorthan thought they had won an easy victory, but they had actually started a war that would destroy their entire empire. They had awakened the beasts. The emergency message reached Earth 48 hours after the attack on New Seoul colony. The message traveled through space using the fastest communication system humans had ever built, but it still took 2 whole days to cross the enormous distance between the colony and home. When the message finally arrived, it changed everything. President Park Min-ho was sleeping in his private quarters when his security chief woke him up at 3 in the morning. The president was 55 years old and had been leading Earth for 6 years. He had seen many crises during his time as leader, but nothing had prepared him for this news. His hands shook as he read the report about the complete destruction of their peaceful colony. Within 1 hour, the president was in the emergency meeting room deep underground beneath the capital city. The room was filled with the most important people in the human government. Ministers and generals and scientists all gathered around a huge table that could seat 50 people. Everyone looked serious and angry as they read the terrible news. Defense Minister Choi Soo-jin was the first person to speak. She was 43 years old and had been a soldier for 20 years before becoming a government leader. She had fought in the last war on Earth and knew what real combat looked like. Her voice was steady, but everyone could hear the anger underneath. When she spoke, she stood up and hit the table with her fist, making a loud bang that echoed through the room. The sound made everyone look at her as she spoke about the attack on their colony. She called it genocide, which was the worst crime anyone could commit against another group of people. She said the aliens had not even tried to talk or make demands. They had simply murdered everyone. The satellite pictures from the colony were displayed on the big screens around the room. Everyone could see the destruction that had been caused by the alien weapons. The buildings were gone, the people were gone, and even the plants in the gardens had been burned to nothing. The colony that had taken 4 years to build was destroyed in just 6 hours. Admiral Kim Tae-hung was the commander of all human military forces in space. He was 60 years old and had been a soldier his entire adult life. He had helped design and build the space fleet that protected Earth and the human colonies. He knew exactly how strong their military was, and he was ready to use that strength. The admiral activated the holographic displays that showed where all the human military ships were located in space. 18 battle groups were spread across 7 different star systems. Each battle group had dozens of ships with the newest weapons and the strongest shields that human technology could build. The ships were much more advanced than the ones humans had used when they first left. Earth Intelligence Director Nam Ji-hai was a quiet woman who rarely spoke in meetings, but when she did speak, everyone listened carefully. She was responsible for gathering secret information about other alien species and their governments. She had been preparing for this day for years. Even though she had hoped it would never come, she activated classified files that showed detailed information about alien civilizations, including their military strengths, their political systems, and their weaknesses. Most of the people in the room had never seen these files before, and they were surprised by how much information the intelligence services had gathered. Project Fenrir was a secret program that had been running for 6 months. The project involved sending human spies to alien worlds to learn about their societies and gather information that could be used in a war. Very few people knew about this project, but now it was time to reveal what they had learned. The Black Operations Teams were special soldiers who worked in secret to protect humanity. They were trained to fight in ways that regular soldiers could not, and they could operate behind enemy lines for months without being detected. These teams had been studying alien military tactics and learning how to defeat them. What the aliens did not know was that humans had never really stopped being warriors. Even though they had built a peaceful civilization and joined the Galactic Council, they had always remembered the lessons of their violent past. They had studied every war that had ever been fought on Earth and learned from every victory and defeat. While other alien species had evolved beyond their aggressive instincts, humans had simply learned to control their aggression and use it more effectively. They had become better at planning and strategy, and they had developed weapons and tactics that no other species had ever imagined. President Park Min-ho stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the city below. Millions of people lived in the capital, and billions more lived on Earth and in the colonies. All of those people were now depending on the decisions that would be made in this room over the next few hours. The president thought about Ginwoo and Lena and all the other people who had died at New Seoul Colony. They had been ordinary people who just wanted to build a better life for themselves and their families. They had never hurt anyone, and they had never threatened the aliens who killed them. When the president spoke to address the nation, his voice was calm, but everyone who heard him could feel the cold anger behind his words. He said that the Vorthan Empire had declared war on humanity by murdering innocent civilians. He said that the aliens thought humans would be scared and would give up their colonies, but the president promised that the aliens were about to learn something very important about human nature. They were going to discover why humans had become the most successful species on Earth and why they had been able to build a civilization that reached across the galaxy. The transformation of human society began immediately. Factories that had been making civilian products switched to making military equipment. Research laboratories that had been working on peaceful projects began developing new weapons and better armor for soldiers. The most important change was that all of humanity united against their common enemy. Every human colony, every space station, and every ship in the fleet received the same message. The galaxy was about to see what happened. When humans were forced to protect their families, scientists who had been studying alien biology began looking for ways to use that knowledge in warfare. Engineers who had been designing better spaceships began designing better weapon systems. Doctors who had been healing people began studying how to heal soldiers who had been wounded in battle. The human military began mobilizing forces on a scale that had never been seen before. Soldiers who had been training for years finally had a real mission. Pilots who had been flying peaceful missions began preparing for combat. Engineers who had been building colonies began building military bases. Communication networks across human space began carrying new kinds of messages, orders for troop movements and weapons shipments and intelligence reports about alien activities. The peaceful chatter of colony life was replaced by the serious business of preparing for war. Young people who had never thought about joining the military began volunteering to fight. Parents who had lost children in the attack demanded the right to serve in combat roles. Even elderly people who were too old to fight offered to help in factories and supply centers. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. When they attacked New Seoul Colony, they had thought that destroying one colony would make humans afraid and would stop their expansion into space. But instead of making humans afraid, the attack had made them angry and determined to fight back. Vorthan Empire had ruled parts of the galaxy for hundreds of years by using fear and violence to control other species. They had never encountered a species that would fight back with the same level of violence and determination that they used against others, but they were about to learn that humans were different from every other species they had conquered. Humans did not give up when they were attacked, and they did not run away when they were threatened. Instead, they became more dangerous and more determined to win. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you attacked human families and murdered human children. The beasts that had been sleeping inside human civilization were beginning to wake up, and when they were fully awake, nothing in the galaxy would be able to stop them.